Hello friends, my name is Lauren. Welcome to my channel. So I've been in such a horror mood recently. In the past, I haven't read a ton of straight up horror, but I want to change that. I definitely only like a very specific type of horror. I can't do like gore or slashers or anything like that. And I also really need my horror to have some sort of sci-fi or fantasy element to it. Like I love anything with ghosts or weird creatures. I had so much fun doing my Summerween vlog, and while I was building the TBR for that video, I came across so many scary summery horror books that looked so good, but I just couldn't fit them all into that video. And one category that kept coming up when I was looking for these types of books was folk horror. And within that category, I found a lot of Indigenous and Appalachian books coming up that were really grabbing my attention. There's just something so intriguing about these stories that have been told for generations. Stories that pull on our innate fear of the unknown, about what is hiding in the most remote, unpopulated areas. But they can also be about what happens when we turn our backs on nature and what nature will do to fight back. These stories also tend to have a very strong through line of tradition and what happens when you break tradition, which I think lends itself pretty well to a more radical storyline, which I love. So that's what I wanted to theme this video around. I've found so many interesting books within this theme, but I've narrowed it down to 3 for this video. Realistically, I cannot be reading too many horror books in a row or I just will never sleep. So that's what I'm gonna stick with. Let's get into my TBR for this week. First, I'm really trying to get through my physical TBR, and I have this copy of Never Whistle at Night. This is a collection of short stories written by Indigenous authors and about Indigenous folklore. The back says, "Many Indigenous people believe that one should never whistle at night. It can cause evil spirits to appear and even follow you home. These wholly original and shiver-inducing tales introduce readers to ghosts, curses, hauntings, monstrous creatures, complex family legacies, desperate deeds, and chilling acts of revenge. These stories are a celebration of Indigenous people's survival and imagination, and a glorious reveling in all the things an ill-advised whistle might summon." So I'm so excited for this one. I've heard really great things about it, and there are a few authors in here that I've been meaning to check out, like Rebecca Rowanhorse, Nick Medina, and Tommy Orange. So I'm really excited to read their stories and see if I enjoy their writing style enough to pick up some of their longer works. The next book I'll be reading is Jackal by Erin E. Adams. This is about a Black woman named Liz who is returning to her childhood home for her best friend's wedding. The town she grew up in is a predominantly white, Rust Belt town in rural Pennsylvania. This town has a very long history of young Black girls going missing in the summer in the woods, and this pattern continues when the bride's daughter Caroline goes missing from the wedding. This just sounds so interesting to me. I always love a good horror book that draws on real life horrors but gives it a supernatural twist. And I also just love anything scary happening in the woods. Like, is it an animal, a human, something else? And so I just think it's perfect that it's set in the Appalachian Mountains. There are countless folk stories of weird creatures or spirits that live in these woods. And I'm not saying I believe them, but I'm not saying that I believe them. I was definitely a creepypasta lover in high school, so just to tie in these scary, seemingly silly stories with the real life horror of being Black in a predominantly white town, I just think this is going to be super interesting. And then lastly, I'm going to be listening to the audiobook for Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. This is a novella about a family who decide to join a group living like ancient Britons in the north of England, with only the tools and ways of life of the Iron Age. But the lines begin to blur between modern day reality and the beliefs and rituals of the ancient Britons they're pretending to be. I'm really excited about this one. It definitely has some mixed reviews, but I've tried not to read any so I can come to my own conclusions about this one. I also don't typically read fiction on audio. I find I can't really follow the story as easily that way, but only the audiobook was available from my library. And it turns out that this audiobook has won multiple awards, so I'm actually really looking forward to this one. So yeah, that is my TBR. I'm hoping I'll be able to finish all of these. If anything, I might skip a few of the stories in Never Whistle at Night so I can get to the authors that I'm most looking forward to, but we'll see. So yeah, I think I'm just gonna go ahead and start with the first story in here. have a bit of a reading update. I finished 4 stories from Never Whistle at Night, and I want to share my thoughts. Since these are short stories, I don't really want to go too in-depth on what they're about, so I'm just gonna share maybe like the overall theme of each story and my thoughts and if I liked it or not. I've also rated each story individually, and I think I'm going to use that to get an average for my overall rating on this collection. So first up was Kushtuka by Matilda Zeller. This one was about a 4 stars for me, maybe 3.5. It was definitely solid and like a really good opener for the collection as a whole. This one is all about colonizers stealing everyday tools and belongings from Indigenous people and turning them into artifacts for their own collections. And the actual horror elements of this were pretty good. It was definitely really creepy. I think the only thing I didn't love is that I didn't fully understand the ending, but maybe that's just a me problem, I don't know. And then next was White Hills by Rebecca Roanhorse. This one was also a 4-star for me, maybe 4.5. I think I liked this one better than the last one. It was definitely not horror until like the last sentence, but I really enjoyed this one. It's all about being white passing and the lengths that someone will go to remove themselves from their culture and fit in with the white upper class society. And the main character was horrible, but it was in like a very fun to read way, so I enjoyed it. But yeah, I thought this one was really well done. I really liked the writing, and now I'm really interested to read something else by Rebecca Roanhorse. Okay, next we have Navajos Don't Wear Elk Teeth by Conley Leons. I had a lot of trouble rating this one. I landed on a 1.5 stars. I really disliked this one. It's about kind of like the fetishization of Indigenous bodies and white people just thinking they can take whatever they want from Indigenous people for their collection. So the premise was interesting, and I loved that it was gay, of course, but like the writing just felt very amateur to me, and the dialogue was so cringy. There was also just so much like over description of imagery that kind of took away from the story, and I think that's really what made it feel amateur, was describing things that don't need to be described in detail. And yeah, that ended up just taking up way too much time of the story for such a short story. And then the climax kind of plot twist element felt really silly to me. Yeah, I don't know. I was just not a fan of this one. I also do kind of wish there were trigger warnings in the book for each of the stories, because if I had known some of the scenes that were going to be in this one, I probably would have skipped it, to be honest. So yeah, if you're going to read any stories in here, obviously look up trigger warnings, but this one especially was really hard to read. Okay, and then the last one I've read so far is Wingless by Marcy R. Rendon. This one was a solid 3.5 stars, I think. It was definitely a little tough to read for how short it was. I think this one might have been the shortest one. So definitely look up trigger warnings for this one. It's all about the foster care system, especially in terms of Indigenous people in the foster care system and abusive foster parents. So yeah, this one was solid. I enjoyed it. So far, I'm really enjoying making my way through these stories. I think just for the sake of getting this video done in time, I'm gonna skip to the ones that I'm most excited about. So I will check in once I've done that. And I've also finished Ghost Wall by Sarah Moss. It was only a 4-hour audiobook, so it was super quick to get through. And I have a lot of thoughts about this book. It started out so strong. I loved the premise. It was very much giving me like midsummer vibes, so I was so ready for that. We're introduced to Sylvie, whose dad is obsessed with the Iron Age Britons and knows everything there is to know about how to live like them. And Sylvie and her parents are joining this college archaeology course, attempting to live like these ancient Britons. And we start to see that Sylvie's dad is very old-fashioned, both in terms of his ideas of gender roles and also his ideas on disciplining your children. I did really like the setup of this theme of gender roles and feminism. It's definitely very simplistic and not very nuanced or intersectional. And I did read some of the reviews after finishing this, also saying that the feminism was very simplistic. And I definitely agree that it's not to the depth I would like out of a book, but I also don't think that like every book has to be this crazy nuanced fresh take on feminism or whatever, because for a lot of people this might be their first introduction to feminism, and if we make every book overcomplicated, then it's not going to be accessible for those types of people who actually need it. That being said, with all of these feminist gender role themes popping up at the beginning, there wasn't really any payoff to justify these themes being brought up. Like, none of the characters really grow or change in regards to these ideas. So that was a little disappointing, because I think if you're going to go the simplistic route, you need to have a pretty clear message and conclusion. I did really like one of the other themes that was touched on, which was that we don't really know how ancient peoples lived. We can make very good educated guesses based on artifacts left behind or the bodies that are found in bogs in this case, but there's still so much we don't know about them. We still don't know why these bodies are being sacrificed to the bogs, and if they even are being sacrificed or whether it's voluntary or not. And we also can only guess at how gender played a role in their societies, and we often just assume that they had the same traditional gender roles that we have now. So yeah, that was a very interesting theme, but again, very little payoff at the end. And the climax and ending of this book in general were pretty disappointing for me. This book does this thing where the prologue is a scene from the climax of the book. So it's immediately revealed that someone is going to be sacrificed in a ritual of some sort. And normally I love this. It makes it so you know what's going to happen, but not how we got there or any of the events leading up to that climax. But then in this case, the build up to that climax never really happened. It was just a pretty normal story up until the exact scene we saw from the beginning. So yeah, I just wish there had been more of some horror elements leading up to that climax. And I would just like it to be a little weirder and have more of like an eerie, off-putting vibe. I'm still going back and forth on what I want to rate this. I'm leaning towards a 2, but that feels a little mean since I did genuinely enjoy like the first half of this book. It was just the second half that kind of went downhill for me. So maybe 2.5. Personally, an ending can really change my opinion on the entire book. So yeah, I think 2.5 is pretty fair. Anyway, so that was Ghost Wall. I guess I would recommend it if you don't mind pretty simple themes and you don't need your horror books to be super weird like I do. Wasn't the biggest fan overall. I will say the audiobook was very good. She does all the accents very well, and it's so short, so you can finish it super fast. Okay, now I'm gonna get back into the 2 books that I'm actually enjoying, thankfully. So I will check back in when I've finished those 2, hopefully on a more positive note. Okay, so I'm about halfway through Jackal and I wanted to do a little check-in. I'm loving this so much so far. It's basically everything I would want in a summer horror. It's like if you took a creepypasta and then turned it into an actually well-written book with compelling characters, an actual plot, and well-developed themes. And so far I love the main character and how relatable and real she is while being somewhat unlikable. I've read a good amount of books similar to this where the author is trying to explore some really heavy themes like racism or class, and it's like they want to make absolutely sure that the audience gets what they're trying to say, so they kind of just spell everything out for you and don't leave any room for nuance. But then the main character ends up being this perfect, morally superior fighter of justice, which I just find kind of boring, to be honest. So I really appreciate that this main character is far from perfect. She definitely has flaws and blind spots, and like by the end, of course, she's gonna fight for justice and be the hero. But at the beginning, she does not want to help. She likes her life as it is and the privileges that she holds, and she's very reluctant to change any of that until something tragic happens to her personally and kind of forces her to change. I'm also really loving the structure and pacing so far. We get these flashbacks every once in a while to other girls who've gone missing, and they're eerily in the first person perspective, but we don't know whose perspective that is yet. And we keep getting these hints of who this person might be that's telling these girls' stories, and I just think that is so cool, and the effect is so unnerving and creepy to not know who this is. And then there are so many themes that have been introduced already in the first half of this book, but I think they're so seamlessly blended already, and so far I'm not feeling like anything's forced or over exaggerated just to make a statement. All of these elements so far feel very natural to the story and the setting and the characters. We've got racism, classism, misogyny, and a particular emphasis on misogynoir. We also have themes of belonging, of growing up as an upper class black girl, not really fitting in with your white peers or your black peers, and also the privileges that class can grant you even if you are a part of a marginalized group. And then we've got the justice system and how the police treat cases involving black people. There's a lot going on, and it's not always the easiest read, but I just think so far at least it is so well done, and I just can't stop reading. I don't want to jinx it, but so far this is looking like it might be a 5-star read for me. There's not a single thing I can complain about so far, so I'm gonna get back into it. I'm probably gonna finish it soon. It is such a page turner. I literally can't put it down. Okay, hello, I'm back for my final check-in. I have just finished Jackal by Erin E. Adams, and this was so good. I ended up giving it 4.5 stars. It was almost a perfect book for me. Basically everything that I talked about loving in the first half continued throughout the whole book, and it definitely got a lot more thrillery towards the end, which I surprisingly enjoyed. I'm not usually a thriller person, but I do think I would consider this a thriller over a horror. But yeah, I was at the edge of my seat the entire time, and I had a really great time with this one. And the horror elements that were there were so good. I love the imagery of both the monster and what it does to its victims. And then all of those themes that were brought up in the first half of the book got really well developed throughout the rest of it and had really nice conclusions and messages at the end. One thing that really got developed towards the end was the depictions of whiteness and how it manifests in traditional gender roles. In women, it tends to be this very quiet internal power, and they will smile in your face while they stab you in the back kind of deal, whereas in men it comes through as very obvious and violent and hateful. So I just thought that was really interesting to see those dynamics play out with the different white characters. And then of course I loved Liz's journey to really accept who she is and what she wants, and you really see her grow as a person and recognize her faults and also the privileges she's been granted. And then the only thing that I didn't absolutely love, and the reason I knocked it down to 4.5 rather than 5, was the plot twist reveal of who was helping the monster, which is something you're trying to figure out the whole time, since it's obvious to the characters that this monster or whatever it is not working alone. And I really felt like that final reveal was kind of like a rug pull moment that I did not see coming, but not in a good way. Like, it was just a little bit disappointing and unsatisfying that it just came out of left field. And one of my biggest pet peeves, and part of the reason I don't really read thrillers, is an unnecessary red herring. And I feel like this book was doing really good of not having crazy red herrings until that last little moment. It just felt like there were one too many red herrings. But other than that, I absolutely loved this book. I loved the ending and the turn that it kind of takes towards the end. And of course, the rest of the book, besides that one little chunk at the climax, was so well done. And I really had a good time reading this one. I highly recommend it to literally anyone who likes thrillers or horror, especially if you like books that dive into real world horrors and use monsters as a metaphor for the worst parts of humanity and the horrible things that a human can do to another human. It was just overall so good, and I'm really glad that I read it. I honestly don't know if I would have read it if I wasn't making this video. So I also recommend reading it in like late summer. I feel like it's the perfect like summer fall transition book. So highly recommend Jackal by Erin E. Adams. And now back to this one, Never Whistle at Night. I've read 5 more stories from this, and I think I'm gonna call it quits at that. I've really been enjoying these, but I've been reading a lot of horror recently and I think I need a break. But let's get into the ones that I have read. First is Quantum by Nick Medina. I didn't like this one. I can't tell if I just didn't like it or if I'm too dumb to understand it. I ended up giving this one like 2.5 stars. It just wasn't a really interesting premise to me to begin with. The characters were not very compelling to me, and the ending was just confusing. But I didn't absolutely hate it. I can tell that Nick Medina is a very talented writer. I really like the writing. Just the premise and the plot of this one didn't really do it for me. So I am interested in reading some other Nick Medina. I have really been wanting to read Sisters of the Lost Nation. So I might check that one out. Hopefully I like it better than this. And then it really went uphill from there. The next one I read was Hunger by Phoenix Boudreaux. This one I really liked. I gave it 4.5 stars. The vibe and tone felt a lot like Jackal, honestly, because we're kind of in the monster's head and peering their thoughts. And I will say, I think in general, for me, it's hard to mesh like kind of an ancient creature with a modern day setting. A lot of times for me that ends up just feeling a little silly and hokey, and I don't usually like it, but this one was really well done. The meshing of this ancient creature on a college campus, they're literally at a frat party making pop culture references, and usually I would not love that, but this one for some reason really did it for me. Yeah, this one was just a solid good time. Highly recommend that one. Okay, and then we have Before I Go by Norris Black. This one was an immediate 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. It literally made me tear up at one part, and it's only 9 pages, so that is extremely impressive. This one is very much about grief and letting go of the person you love. Really loved the ending of this one. It was such a full circle moment, and I also really loved the imagery of death as like just a white lady. I don't know why that made me laugh. I won't say anything else, but it was so good. I am a little sad because I looked up this author and it doesn't look like he has anything else published. Maybe in the future he'll publish something. I would love to read a full-length novel from this author. I thought he did such a good job with this. And next, I honestly can't decide which one is my favorite before I go or this next one, which is Kagra by Tommy Orange. And yes, I did have to look up how to pronounce Kagra. It is not what I thought it was, but this one I also gave 5 stars to. It was so good start to finish. This one revolves around the Kagra delusion, which is a rare psychiatric disorder that makes people believe that their loved ones have been replaced by imposters, basically. And I don't even want to say anything else about this story. You have to read it. It feels like a fever dream in the best way. Obviously, Tommy Orange is a very acclaimed author, so the writing was incredible. I really enjoyed it and the way that it concluded. I've been wanting to read There by Tommy Orange for a while, so this has really given me the push to do that. And then the final one that I read was Collections by Amber Blazer Wardzala. Hopefully I'm saying that right. This one I gave 4 stars to. It was solid. It was definitely creepy and gave me chills up my spine at multiple parts. It was very absurd, bordering on silly, but I think the execution was done well enough to make me suspend my disbelief, and I ended up really enjoying this one. It's really about the dehumanizing of people in general, and specifically Black, Indigenous people of color, and the fetishization of their bodies. So yeah, really enjoyed this one. It was a solid way for me to end my experience with this. I'll definitely try to get through some of the other stories in here eventually, but I think I read the ones that I was most interested in reading for now. And like I said, I need a break from horror, so I will get back to that at a later time. So that concludes this little reading vlog. I had such a good time going through all of these books revolving folk horror. I'm definitely interested in more books like these in the future, but definitely need to take a break and maybe read some fantasy in the next month or so. But yeah, let me know if you guys have read any of these books and what you thought, or if you've read any of the stories in Never Whistle at Night. Let me know what your favorites were, or if you agree with my ratings. I think overall I'm sitting at like a 4 stars for this collection in general. I hope you guys enjoyed coming along with me for this, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!